The peace of Christ be with you. This is a midweek reflection for Third Reformed on August 5th. And this week I want to think together about what it means to remain defined within yourself and connected to other people. Now, developmental psychology tells us that definition between ourselves and others doesn't happen right away in the human life, that when a baby is born, there's no real distinction between it and the mother. And I remember learning that firsthand as a parent myself. When my two sons were infants, I would hold them in my lap and see them gazing back up at my face. And eventually they began mirroring back what they saw there, so that if I frowned, they would frown. If I smiled, they would smile. Just parroting back the emotion that they saw. It takes time for the child to realize that they are actually a self distinct from those who are caring for it. And that can take a while. I remember my oldest son sitting at the table with me, and he would often talk in third person plural pronouns about what he was feeling, so that if he was enjoying the macaroni and cheese he was eating, he'd look at me and say, "We like macaroni and cheese," meaning me and him. There was no clear sense for him that we were actually different people. Sometimes I wonder if he thought my wife and I were actually different people, because he would call me Mappa, a combination of Mama and Papa, which is the same thing that he called her. You kind of had to just use context to figure out which Mappa he happened to be talking to. But eventually, over time, he has begun to develop a sense of identity and self distinct from those who are raising him and caring for him. You've maybe heard me talk in the past about systems theory, this framework for understanding how families and other systems like a congregation function. It's out of that world that we get things like the anxiety bucket that we talked about earlier in the summer, where we learn about triangulation, about the fight, flight, or freeze response to anxiety. And one of the processes that systems theory talks about is differentiation of self. How do you differentiate, right? Create a difference between yourself and others? And it turns out that process of defining ourselves apart from those we are connected to takes a lot of time and a lot of work in our lives. Even into adulthood, there are some really powerful forces at work within us where we understand ourselves and make decisions and respond in particular ways based off from the opinions, expectations, and evaluations of those that we are most closely connected to. Certainly parents or guardians who were a part of our first formation, but also other communities like a church that you're a part of. There's a strong togetherness force that pushes towards conformity. And it can take a lot of intentional effort to differentiate ourselves from those opinions, expectations, and evaluations of those that we're connected to. And it's interesting to me as I get to hear a lot about kind of people's lives and journeys of spiritual growth and self-development, right? How often we can do that work apart from a certain context and then find ourselves slipping back into old patterns once we get into it, right? So that might be like a story I've heard from many people where, parents maybe repeated this message that stung a little bit and took root down in your heart. So maybe your mom repeatedly let you know that she thought you were overweight, or your dad let you know that he didn't think you were up to the task of whatever, you were setting your mind to. And for years and years and years and years and years, that opinion or evaluation gets ingrained within you. I'm overweight. I'm not beautiful enough. I am not up to the task at hand. I'm not a hard enough worker, whatever that is. And you grow up, you move off, you begin your adult life, you start to create some differentiation of yourself from all of that and define yourself differently. Maybe that's through some good counseling work, or just a change in scenery or context, or a deepening understanding of kind of your biblical God-given identity and rooting that in God's view of you, not just, the parent. And you think that you are making real headway and aren't influenced by that anymore. But then all of a sudden you go back home for Thanksgiving and you find yourself back in that same original context, and all of the same patterns start to play out. And all of a sudden this part of yourself that you thought you'd grown out of starts to take back hold, and you start shaping your own identity or inner dialogue, again, according to that expectation or evaluation that you've been dealing with your entire life. That can be really challenging to recognize within ourselves. And oftentimes when, especially there's a negative kind of experience like that, the first step in differentiating yourself from that can result in some separation, some fracturing of that relationship, where you come to the realization that, you know what, my mother's been saying this about me my entire life, and I don't like the way that makes me feel. And every time I go back home, I start feeling that all over again. So I'm just not going to go there anymore. I'm going to break off and sever that relationship. I'm not going to call. I'm not going to come back for holidays, because I don't like what happens to me when I'm back under the weight of that opinion, expectation, and evaluation. And that can be sometimes a necessary step along the journey. But systems theory would say that you're not really emerging into maturity until you are able to define yourself apart from the opinions, expectations, and evaluations of others, while still remaining connected to them. The target you're aiming for is being able to stay connected to the people you are close to without letting your sense of self be just sucked up and conformed into the pressures that you experience there. That freedom to say, just because you say this is who I am, doesn't mean that's actually who I am. And just because you expect me to function in a particular way, doesn't mean I have to do that. But I still want to be in relationship with you. I still want to stay connected to you. And once you are able to start living into that kind of definition of self while remaining connected to others, some remarkable healing and growth can occur, not just for you, but for everybody else that you're connected to as well. And I don't know if you've noticed, but that's really necessary work right now in a culture that is deeply, deeply divided, and in a world that encourages that divisiveness. You may find yourself logging on to social media and seeing these people you're connected to, family, friends, church community, neighbors, and realizing, whoa, wait a second, we are not the same people. I have a sense of self that is not in line with who you're telling me I ought to be. And the temptation can be to give in to, cancel culture motives and just create separation, divide, unfriend people, withdraw, sever ties. But I wonder if part of being a healthy, mature self, rooted in Christ, right, anchored in that definition of self that comes out of the way that God views you and how God has uniquely created you to be. Right? I wonder about the transforming power of being able to live rooted in that clear sense of self while remaining connected to those who may be applying pressure on you to be different, to conform, to go back to the way that you used to be before you maybe experience some growth or development in your own life. I think that that can be a pretty powerful force in our world right now. So as we head into the home stretch of an election season, as there continues to be ongoing disagreement and debate around the best ways to respond to the pandemic, as we face all kinds of pressures and anxieties in this current uncertain time, I'd encourage you to do some reflecting and some work on who you truly are as a defined self, and how you can remain rooted in that clear sense of self and connected even to those who may want to press up against that. Now, if you got any stories or experience that you would like to share and add to that conversation, I would love it if you'd include it in the comments below or reach out to a conversation with me.